Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, Insurance Perk of the Stars, here with a special weekend edition. Today we're talking about risky business, the insurance side of RMM compromises. Before we begin, this is my latest book, Damage Control Cyber Insurance Compliance, about 500 pages. That's where you can download it for free. All right, moving on here, let's start thinking about, okay, how much liability do these RMM vendors actually hold? Well, likely very little liability, as a matter of fact. So you'd have to go back, check the merchant services agreement, aka the contract that you have with these companies or a particular company. But most likely, I'm going to say they have probably better attorneys and more attorneys than you would as a small to medium sized business. So they've done everything they can to try and make themselves bulletproof there. My guess, just kind of shooting from the hip here, would be that they're likely going to have some sort of mandatory arbitration proceeding. It probably has to be done where they're physically located. So under current circumstances, I believe that would be Florida. So then you have to say, okay, if you're outside of Florida, how does that really work? It could just be a giant pain for you. Next, you have to understand who actually had the contract with this RMM vendor. Now, your clients probably have no idea who these individuals actually are or who this company is or why you picked them versus some other company. So what does all that really mean? It means if something happens with your client because there was some issue with the RMM, you as the MSP or the MSSP, you're going to be the first in the firing line. And by that, I mean you are probably going to be, or likely, the first to face some type of legal action or a claim following some event at your client. Now, please don't confuse your fault versus your problem. Just because you didn't necessarily do anything wrong, it doesn't mean it's not going to be your problem. So if you want to know, hey, is it your fault or is it your problem? The answer is likely yes. If your client is impacted by this, remember, you are likely the first person in the firing line. But why is that? Well, one, it's just a lot easier. You're a direct connection. They know who you are. They know where you're located. You're the first person that they can point a finger at when their business is down, when they can't generate revenue, et cetera, et cetera. Going out to a third party, that tends to be legally quite complicated. It can also be much more expensive and very, very difficult to prove some type of negligence there, because who knows if you implemented something incorrectly and if their attorney would even go through the process of trying to figure that out. Whereas you as the MSP or the MSSP, you're just the first one they're going to point the finger at. So just remember, it can be your fault. It can be your problem. So just keep that in mind. And what are they going to say? You have all of these technical, rational reasons why maybe it wasn't your fault, but it can be your problem, because all they need to say is, hey, I hired you to keep me safe. That didn't pan out. Now I've been damaged. Hence, I'm going to bring a claim against you and your insurance company. Now, with all of that being said, keep in mind the subpoena death spiral. Now, what is that? Well, let's just go ahead and go on through it. Let's say I was some plaintiff's bar attorney and my client had been subject to this particular attack and I had been hit with ransomware, or my client had been hit with ransomware, and now they're at a ton of cash and they're really angry and they have hired me to try and recoup those losses. Well, let's say I'm an attorney and I'm not particularly tech savvy. I'm just the business attorney down the street. Well, what am I going to do? This right here. So this is from Psychotic. I just pulled this right off of Reddit. So you'll see, he just starts going through. And what would I do if I was a plaintiff's attorney and this was my job? I would just start going through and I would subpoena all the records. And through the discovery process, through court proceedings, I would try to see, did you do all of these things? And if you missed even one of these things, could I, let's say reasonably, hang my hat for the client saying, well, if you would have done this thing, there's a high probability that my client never would have been impacted by this. So therefore you were negligent in the professional services that you were rendering to my client. Now, how weighty would that particular argument be to another tech savvy person who is familiar with this industry? Maybe it could be the straw that broke the camel's back. Maybe it's completely irrelevant or only tangentially relevant to how safe that client would be. But you have to remember, to a jury of non-technical people, it sounds like a bunch of big words, and the plaintiff's attorney is going to say, you should have done this. It could have kept my client safe. You didn't do it. Therefore, you are negligent, and therefore you owe my client all of this money. Now, in terms of cyber insurance for your clients, I just want to briefly kind of touch on this. First, I know you guys are seeing all kinds of cyber insurance applications come in. I know you're answering all types of questions there, and people are asking you for your professional opinion on those cyber policies. Now, I do cyber insurance for a living, as well as E&O and tech E&O insurance, as well as employment practices. So I'm very, very savvy in this particular area. But what is it you need to be looking for as it relates to this particular discussion? Obviously, coverage for ransomware, data breaches, social engineering, wire fraud, that type of coverage. But in terms of self-preservation, dependent business interruption, what does that actually mean? That means that, let's say your MSP goes down because of some type of cyber event, I will say. So that could be a data breach or ransomware, et cetera, at your MSP. And because of that, your client is losing revenue. Well, the idea is that the cyber policy could come in and reimburse them for that lost revenue because your MSP went down because of a cyber event. So very, very useful for you. Next is going to be dependent system failure. That would be the same exact circumstance, but it's not because of some type of cyber event. It's because of, let's say, a bad patch, for example, and you had to shut your system down, rebuild it. That's where dependent system failure comes in. But once again, the idea is your client looks at their cyber insurance company to make them whole again. They're not looking at your tech E&O insurance policy to make sure that they're being made whole again. So think in terms of self-preservation. Next, plan for risk transference now. This should just be a giant wake-up call that you can do everything right as an MSP or an MSSP, and your clients can still be damaged. Unfortunately, that's just how the world is operating. So what are some of those elements of risk transference I want everyone to think about? It's these right here. So as I go down the list, what does all of this mean? It means please just watch this video. It's a bunch of free considerations I put out for everybody. It's like 25 minutes long. And these are just tried and true methods that you can look at bringing into your own business to try to start transferring that risk away from your particular MSP or MSSP. So if you want to look at that, I'll link to that above right here, and I'll put the link in the description below. All right, if you have been impacted by this or your clients have been impacted by this, what are some things you really need to keep in mind? What is a claim? Has somebody made a claim against you? If you don't know what that is, that's a problem. Refer to the previous video that I just linked to. Next, what is a potential claim? You haven't faced a claim yet, but if your clients have been impacted by this particular event, I think it's very reasonable to say that you could have a claim coming down the pike. So please don't get caught in the most common declination of coverage as far as E&O goes, and that is late report of a potential claim. Next, just make sure you have the right tech E&O policy. If you have a separate E&O policy and a separate cyber insurance policy, you are likely wrong. Once again, refer to the previous video, and there's a whole bunch of reasons behind that, but please make sure you have the correct tech E&O policy so that you're not facing total or partial declinations of coverage and you have all the correct coverage that you need. And if you're ever confused, speak with qualified legal counsel. All right, with that, if you enjoyed this video, this is where you can go to watch another one. That is where you can go. You can click on my beautiful face and subscribe to this channel. Like, comment, subscribe. New video every Thursday. And with that, stay safe.